All right. Hey.
We're doing the thing. We're doing the stuff.
Thing. So, hello everybody.
Hey everybody, you get to see me post up that we're doing this.
Yay!
Yay!
Posting.
It's so exciting.
We want to make sure everything works before we do anything.
That is also true. You got me there. So what are we doing tonight, honey?
Tonight we are doing our very first director commentary for our very first issue of the Uniques.
Wow.
We've done director commentaries before.
We have.
We've never done anything quite like this before, so we're going to see how it works.
Whilst doing it live somewhere.
Yeah, right.
And really, we haven't done a director commentary in a long, long time. We're talking about years.
Yeah. Well, we had recorded a couple for the first couple issues.
And never released them.
But we haven't put them up because we were thinking about trying to do something different, something a little more interactive. And here we are.
Yay!
So what we're going to be doing tonight is we're going to be walking through the first issue, the pages here, and talking about the process, talking about how the Uniques came to be, what we were trying to do with the book. You'll be hearing some complaints from cats as we go. Because that's just the way.
Obi, come here. Where are you, buddy?
He's right behind you, I think.
Is he?
Somewhere. I don't know.
I want to make sure he's not stuck someplace.
I'm sure he's not stuck, honey. Oh, our cats. So yeah, that's how we're going to go. And then, depending on how it works out, we will...
There you are, buddy.
Yeah.
Hey.
We'll move on and show the original first issue. I think the first thing that we should probably start with is that the first issue of Uniques we're talking about here is the extended director's cut, which is a re-release of the Unique series that we had started in 2008.
That is true, but we are also not going to be focusing on the back and forth between them.
That'll be later. But it's important to know that what you're seeing here, what we're going over, is us revamping, retooling, expanding, and relaunching the series. Hey, Cadis, welcome aboard. Relaunching the series so that we can continue it, because we have a lot of issues planned for Uniques, like 100 issues all in. It's a very big series, and we wanted to make sure that we stuck the opening. That people who come to us for the first issue can be with us throughout the series and be as into it from the beginning as the people who started with us in 2008.
Darn right.
Are you almost ready?
I'm almost ready.
She is the slowest
I don't.
typist
I
in
do
the
it with the
world.
one thumb. It's super lame, but you know what? This is part of, I would say, the ambiance.
Sure.
There we go.
Oh, comfy Q. All right.
Posted!
So, here is our notes.
Notes of what we want to talk about.
Yes, because we didn't want to necessarily just take it for granted that we would remember everything we wanted to talk about.
That's right. And again, as people have questions, if you have questions, feel free to share them, and we will try and answer everything as we go.
Yes, absolutely. We got the chat running, and if there's stuff you want us to talk about, let us know, and we'll try and cover it.
All right.
Here we go.
So let's start with the
cover.
Yay! So all the covers and stuff that we do in Uniques are actually based off of generally art history and stuff, or other popular things in art that
art
reference
that inspires us.
Right.
Because doing covers sucks. I don't like doing covers at all. I would rather do pages all day than ever do covers. So much rides on a cover. It has to represent the entire issue in a single image and be exciting enough that people want to get into it, pick it up and flip through it. There's just a lot of pressure there.
There is a lot of pressure. So we allow that pressure to be somewhat sopped up by other creators and stuff throughout history, and we were a big fan of art history, having to do a lot of art history while we were in school. Took a lot of art history
classes, that's true.
Because we went to an art college. That's where we met. Okay.
And so throughout the series, you're going to see us riffing on a whole lot of different artists and creators and styles and stuff for our covers. partly because it's fun, always because it represents something about what's happening in that issue, and partly to make it easier for us to figure out what the hell we want to draw.
So this cover here is a window into sort of like big splashy movie covers, and particularly we were looking at Drew Struzan covers.
Struzan, the king of the movie poster. He has a way of doing these epic collages that are just fantastic, so we wanted to tap into that a lot. This is also a representation of the status quo of the Unique's world as the series begins. The main characters at play in the way that
Spoilers. I mean, come on, you're reading
there are
this
going
with
to be
us.
tons of spoilers in this. It's a director commentary.
Right. If you haven't read this and you didn't want to be spoiled, well, I'm sorry. So anyways, the point is that it's the status quo, but many of these characters are here to not make it out to the end. You know,
That's
this
true.
is what the world was, and by the end, it will be what the world is.
Yeah, so let's move on. We like to open each of our issues with a recap. For the first issue, that means we're recapping things you haven't seen yet.
right.
Like the episode 4 title scroll for Star Wars.
And on our recap here, we're letting everybody know that there was a almost hot or just barely hot Cold
The Cold
War.
War almost went
Right.
nuclear, and we just barely survived, and now we're coming out the other
Right,
end.
and that was 1993. This is 1994. Everybody's gathering at the UN.
But the point is that we want to make sure that people stay in the series, and we also know that we can. Our best release schedule is bi-monthly because we're doing like 30 to 36 page issues every time. We are writing, drawing, coloring, lettering, and self-publishing all of these issues. It's a huge amount of work, and so
We wear a lot of hats.
because it might be longer between releases than we would like, and certainly I'm sure a lot more than our readers would like, we want to make sure that you can remember the important stuff of what's happening.
Now, on top of that, we've also got little tiny headshots of the characters
the
and
cast
stuff
list.
that are important to the issue that you're going to be reading.
Right.
And since this deals with powers and stuff, we usually say their skills and abilities and powers, so you get a sense of what each one can do.
And the other nice thing about that is that it makes it so that we don't have to reintroduce characters in the story. Have that thing like, oh, hello there, Hope, aka Telepath. How are your powers of telekinesis and telepathy doing today, you know?
And everybody would be like, that story's super lame.
We just
I don't want to read
focus
it.
on, you know how the second movie in a series is frequently can benefit from not having to introduce characters. The people all know each other already and can just talk to each other. We wanted to get that right from the start. So they talk to each other like they would talk to each other instead of having to talk to the audience through each other.
So let's move forward into
Yeah.
the very first page. In the very first page, when we initially released this was just black, and it was text on a
Yeah,
black
the text
page.
fading in on the black page.
And that was nice, but it really, we felt like needed something more. So when we went to do the trade paperback that this was released
Yeah.
in, I went through and I sort of added the heartbeat because we want to get that sense of the hospital feeling, like preparing the audience for like a more rapidly increased heartbeat so that when we get to that next page, it feels like it's a natural flow from one to the other, and it's a good cut. It's a
Yeah.
good surprise.
Sort of subtly increases the volume in your mind. Welcome, Kinesu. Glad you could join us. And then comes to the big splash page, the oh shit panel, we like to say, which is, you know, you're turning the pages and things are building, and then you get the big oh shit moment.
So this is the wake up moment, and this is an old drawing from
it is.
2000.
This is a 2008 original. We slightly altered the angle, and I don't even
We
know
zoomed
if we
in.
touched up. And zoomed
Yes,
in a
we
little
definitely
bit, but I'm
zoom
not
in.
sure that we touched up that much of the drawing itself. This is mostly in 2008 original.
Yep, this is a two.
Note Hope's two-toned hair. It serves a couple functions. In the original, this happened midway into the issue. We'll be showing you that later, but it still serves the function of setting up time that has passed, you know, the dye job that has grown out. And when you see young Hope later in the issue and she's got the darker sort of burgundy hair, you can know that it's probably the same person, and that's where the shorter hair or the dark hair
Longer,
came from.
right. So, very quickly, this is something that they would probably never have allowed to happen.
Yeah, because you can't change your character model. People get confused.
Exactly. Well, not just that. If you were in an actual hospital situation, you were in a coma for 2 years, this is just not something that people would be like, let's do
They probably would
it.
have cut her hair. They
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have just let her hair grow out like that. But we thought it was a better touch. There's also what we're trying to set up here with the cold open with Telepath is she has no idea where she is or what's going on, and it's all really kind of scary to her. And we, the audience, don't know where
Right.
she is or what's happening or what's going on.
So you're seeing the story from the eyes of the protagonist, and the
Yeah.
protagonist is in the same spot as the audience. So as the protagonist learns things, you, the audience, learn
Yeah.
things as well. And that's very classic storytelling style.
David brings up the similarities between this and Fairchild's wake-up scene in Gen 13.
And I've got to remember that better. I'm sure that's
I'm sure that was
definitely-
part of
like,
the chemistry, but not
exactly.
intentionally. We're both big Gen 13 fans and Campbell fans, and so I have no doubt that there's a lot of inspiration there that we weren't even aware of. So
happened all in our lizard
yeah.
brains. All right,
Lizard
next
brain,
page.
Ahoy. So now we're building that sense of panic. We wanted this to be just about as terrifying a medical situation as you can have.
Right.
Just covered in probes and things and wires everywhere. And I don't know what those do, by the way, but one presumes they do something.
But we did have to look up what Code Gray was, because
Yes.
Code Red was a fire.
Yeah.
And we were like, we don't want to use that. We want to be, again, accurate. And we have
Accuracy.
the internet where you can look up things.
We enjoy research when we're doing our writing, and yeah. So before we started throwing terminology around, we thought it'd be smart to look it up. So yeah.
So
Code Red would have been reporting on a fire. Code Gray is a violent patient.
Yep, so sometimes we're going to do bullshit like with the hair
Sometimes
because
we
it looked
will.
cool, and sometimes we're going to do things that are totally accurate.
I guess Code Gray is more important to us than getting the girl a haircut.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's much scarier probably than a hospital sequence would be normal,
Right.
but we wanted her terrified
Right.
to really believe. If we move into the next page, I feel like we should have a little dinger. So
We
that
should have a dinger. Moving into the next page. Beep.
Anybody else our age remembers those old
right.
audio books?
Turn the page. Fling.
Yeah, so that she would believably freak the hell out
Right,
when
and-
people start coming in.
On our next page here, page 4, this is our first introduction of Caliber. And it's
Caliber.
important to talk about Caliber for just 2 seconds. Adam,
Yes.
what does Caliber stand for?
Caliber is an overwrought acronym, as virtually all such organizations are.
Mm-hmm.
It stands for, and this took us, by the way, weeks to find a good acronym, because we initially had called them SEC, S-E-C, the Strategic Enforcement Command or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Strategic Enforcement Corps. That's what
Thank
it
you.
was. And it sounded cool, but then all of a sudden, around 2008, something happened with the world economy. And the Securities Exchange Commission,
Oops.
SEC, became a much more well-known name.
And we had already started putting out the books, and we were like, well, I guess we'll just leave
Stop
it for
the sec.
now. But with the director commentary, that's one of the
Director's
things.
cut, we get a chance to go
Yeah,
back in. So,
exactly.
Caliber
There you go.
is the Containment, Assault, Logistics, and Interdiction Bureau for Regulation of Extra Humans. Extra humans being
Unions.
hyphenated, therefore just the E counts, not the H
Right.
counts. I warned you that it was an overwrought acronym. So we wanted to have a bunch of different kinds of Caliber agents for different purposes. It's a very large and broad federal agency. And here we have the black-suited, like, top-tier super agents.
Right. And I like to think of them as federal agents, but they're all federal
They
agents.
are all federal
like they're
agents,
all
but it is,
federal.
It's kind
right.
of the difference between, you know, when there's the scene in the show and there's the cops there, and then the feds show up and it's like, oh crap! Now
Right.
it's on.
Those are the federal
That's these
agents.
guys.
You'll see other ones in blue, which they're not part of the cops, but I like to think that they're cop agents.
Sort of. They're more local focused.
Right.
The blue armored ones, you'll see them.
And there's
later.
military agents intelligence, all this kind
military
of stuff.
level. Yeah, there's different tiers of caliber.
Anyways.
The black tier is the top tier, the most elite, most highly trained, most dangerous. And for our purposes, they have the full face masks to make them seem less human and more scary. They had to feel like once we learn what's happening in the story later, you can be like, oh, okay, I can see how those are like legit military guys. But when you first see them, you don't know what they are. And they could be anything. They could be bad guys. We don't know.
Point is, we're trying here to start building a world, and that's what this issue is doing.
Yep.
All right, moving forward.
Next page. Something that was important to us was that Hope couldn't just get out of bed and go running because she's been in a coma for 2 years.
Right. And again, we're, not totally honest about this completely. We're, halfway in the story. We're bending the rules, but we try. We try. So trying to have the atrophy and stuff like that, we're also starting to see story-wise the very first of the little flashbacks and stuff that are going to build what's coming.
The question is asked where Telepath's head power halo came from. I'll back it up a page and zoom in here so you can see that. What? Where's the... What does my zoom?
I'm not sure.
Pretty sure
I can't tell you.
Option here. There it is.
There it is.
All right, so talking about this halo around the edge here.
That is an Art Nouveau thing that we came up with because we were trying to find something that looked cool when she did it rather than just doing a little bit of pink.
Yeah. It also owes its origins to us reading a lot of comics in the 90s. And in the 90s, when digital color started getting really big, suddenly all the heroes started having really cool power effects. And Scions, if anybody out there who read 90s X-Men remembers Psylocke's butterfly effect when she would use her psionic powers.
Yep.
That kind of stuff is really cool. And we wanted to have something. Sort of visual signifier that she's using her telepathy.
Right, the telepathy. And it specifically denotes the telepathy. Yeah. We don't have her use it when it's just the telekinetics. All right.
Absolutely, man. It looked cool, is perfectly acceptable.
And yes, sort of like how going back to Caliber, how...
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of names that are perfectly fine until everybody starts using it for something else.
All right.
With the muscle atrophy on the legs, this is a real thing. We always wanted Uniques to deal with superhero stuff in a slightly more grounded, real world way.
And I think the delicateness of humans and humanity is something that oftentimes gets lost
overlooked
in superhero books. Like
they
just
get thrown through walls.
Right, exactly, and they're fine. And it's not even just the superheroes; it's everybody and their mother gets thrown through a wall, and they're fine. There's no internal bleeding in superhero books. So we wanted to slowly find ways to sort of bring that back.
The other thing that this helps to do is it makes Telepath herself a much more relatable, frail, delicate person.
And in the first few minutes, there's something small she has to overcome.
She has to overcome. She's the underdog, and we're rooting for her.
Hopefully.
Moving to the next page, we give her the hero moment and then immediately strip that dignity away because nobody in a hospital is allowed to keep their dignity.
Also butt shots are funny.
Also butt shots are funny. This is true.
It's a simple fact. It's like farts are funny, so are butt shots.
Yeah. We used her telekinesis to strengthen her legs, sort of reinforcing. She's basically using telekinetic leg braces right now, making herself run literally by sheer force of will.
Let's move forward to the next page.
So we had a moment for comedy, and that's something we also wanted to balance briefly, because the other side of making a more realistic, grounded world is we didn't want to do the Marvel version of that, which is our stuff is realistic because everybody has a shitty day every day.
And I actually want to take back the Marvel
That's
version
true,
because everybody
DC is
knows
so deep in that
No,
now.
not just that. It's that everybody knows the Marvel movies, and I think the Marvel movies were able to find a balance. We're thinking of comics.
Yeah.
Not everybody will be thinking of comics.
But anyway, real life has funny moments,
Right.
has good times and bad times in hopefully something like equal
Right.
share. And so if we're going to be more honest about the stuff they have to go through and make them suffer more in some ways because they're not perfect, we want to balance that out by still allowing them to smile and allow good things to happen and keep some funny stuff happening. So
The
it's not
point
just
is, we're
doom
not
and
here
gloom
to
all
do
the time.
Watchmen.
No, we're not doing Watchmen.
All right.
Thank God.
Move.
All right, next page.
All right, so when we do Telepath and her powers, another thing we wanted to get across was that she was a different kind of psionic character. Like a
Yeah.
lot of psions are very static; they don't really move. They have their head powers, and that's
They
about
sort of
it.
float around
Right.
and like zap people. Or you've got the Jean Grey thing where she just like hangs in the back with her fingers to her temples and things happen. They can get kind of dull, and you can start feeling like you know what you're going to get when you see psionic characters.
Right.
So we wanted Telepath to be more rounded than that. It also allowed us to deal with the problems of telepathy and telekinesis, which is if you can go into somebody's head and muck around in there, why can't you solve every problem by doing that?
Right, and so, like, for instance, Professor X is a character that
Oh,
is as
Professor X.
powerful as plot,
Yes,
and being as powerful as plot,
and he's about as moral
right,
as plot.
and as
too.
moral as plot. So we really wanted to set up, and we'll get into more of this later, but some kind of structure for how people with telepathic abilities
What's
and
allowed.
stuff. Yeah, what was allowed. There's a lot of legal things that we've
Yeah.
actually put into the world
Yes,
of Uniques.
there's a book that we read that we highly
and the
recommend.
guys who wrote it are lovely people and very
Yeah,
nice.
fans of the
And-
book.
Yep.
We've met them after we'd started releasing Uniques many years ago, and the book is called "The Law of Superheroes." It's by a pair of authors, both lawyers, practicing lawyers, and it looks at questions of superheroes and how they would interact with the real world law, constitutional questions, like regular civil law questions, all things like that. And something that we kept thinking about over and over again is how legal is it to just get into somebody's head and pull out information? In a very real way, that breaks
Right.
your
Constitutional
Fifth Amendment
rights.
rights not to incriminate yourself. So we had to come up with a lot of ways to balance the powers that the heroes have with the law so
Right.
that regular people can continue living in this world not being terrified of things that could happen to them. And making Telepath, like David says, more like a Jedi and less like an all-powerful scion, both makes her more grounded and weaker, and she can't just resolve every problem by using her powers, and also makes it more interesting, gives us more balance, and gives
Right.
the world more rules that we can work
I
with.
want to make sure that we're getting to
Yeah.
any of those things here, and I want to acknowledge Sam's thing that, it's enough realism not to kill the fun, and I do think that's really important, and
Yeah.
that's exactly sort of where we're going.
Yeah.
It's trying to find some sort of a balance.
And again, the psychic powers can indeed get broken if you don't put some throttle on. One of the biggest reasons, too, is you've got to have somewhere to go with your characters. And if she was amazing right from the start, then how does she grow?
Right.
Telepath is going to be nuts
We
by
take-
the end of this series.
Right. We take great pride in our characters being able to have
Get
their
their ass
asses kicked
kicked.
by not just
Most
people
other
in
characters.
right by people in the story that we're writing, but any other
Yeah.
character,
Yeah.
basically anywhere. You got to start them low in order to have an arc. All right,
Yeah.
let's move forward.
Next page. There is a balance that you're seeing here between old panels and new panels. So the first couple panels up here,
These are old.
both old panels from the 2008 release. The next row, in fact, I think the rest
The
of
whole
page-
thing, yeah.
No, panels 3, 4, and
Nope.
6.
That's new.
That's not, is that entirely
Yes, it is.
new?
It is
or is
entirely
that a
new.
redraw of...
Nope.
Okay.
That's new.
entirely new. See, I even fooled myself. So you're seeing a lot of back and forth between old art and new art.
That's going through the whole book. And
Throughout the
so
whole
what we
issue.
had to do is sometimes the old art does get tightened up every
Yeah.
now and again things that, proportions might have been off. Some little action things didn't quite work. So
adjusting some bodies.
Right. It's
like
easy
that.
to adjust it and just tighten it up versus completely redraw it. And that's what we wanted to avoid, was completely redrawing.
Yes.
I think another important thing here to point out is that this is not easy for her. Pointing out how she's got to hold the wall as she rounds the corners, how she's breathing
struggled
hard.
Faces. Even though she's clearly whooping ass here, it's also a struggle for her.
Right.
We just watched the Movie Bob review of John Wick, the second John Wick, and something he said also pertains when he was talking about Keanu Reeves as somebody who is a believable physical presence, but also looks like it's work. Like, this isn't just easy, and that makes you care more, makes you more invested in the character, because they're doing awesome stuff, but they're also more human. So that's definitely something we wanted to do. Psychic powers are inadmissible in court, says Kenesu, unless you can have double-blind verification. We have a whole system in place for how psionics would be used in a judicial setting. How
we're going to do so many things with the court system.
Man.
I'm so excited.
We really are. We really are.
Because Uniques is a story about society, not necessarily these 7 characters.
There's a whole bit in season 2 that's going to talk about how to use psionic powers basically as a recording device when you're sending somebody in undercover, and how the Scion would be able to relay that information in a way that is clearly not being clouded or mucked with. It's a whole thing. We've thought about that, and that's fun stuff for us to work with.
All right.
Next page.
Swearing.
Swearing, yeah.
It's important because swearing is one of those things, again, about authenticity.
Yeah.
And trying to find a way to make sure that the characters talk like they would talk.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people have brought up, read the book, and they're like, this is great. But they say read the first issue or the first 4 issues, which are very, I would say, safe in some of, the painful things that might happen to the characters.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, this is great, but, you didn't really, murder anybody here, so why do you need swearing?
Yeah.
Well...
if it wasn't for the language, you could make this an all-ages book.
Right.
First off, it's not going to be an all-ages book. We're going to get to some adult situations.
Right. There's a reason we're usually, 14, 16 plus.
Yeah, things are going to happen to them, and we don't want to be hamstrung by trying to take a more mature story and PG-13ify it just for the sake of being able to sell to a wider audience.
Right.
Secondly, this is the way people talk, and we want people to speak the way that they speak, and we're willing to... it sort of feels like, to go back a little bit, if you can't handle the swearing, you probably won't be able to handle the other stuff we're doing either.
So it's warming you up, and it's really purposeful that the first trade of Uniques is very sort of at least feeling like traditional superheroes. You're slowly touching into the world again because you don't want to, give off the vibes of something like Watchmen and stuff like that, which has got its own tropes to it. So rather than diving into that, we're walking you in, hopefully making you love the characters, and then when we put them through pain, you really care.
Yeah.
All right.
On the last panel, notice that we lit up the up arrow on the elevator. It's a really subtle thing most people are not going to pay any attention to, but it was trying to signify that she is low underground, having to go up to get to the exit, which is the opposite of what you would expect.
Now, technically, the light would have gone off with the ding, but
right.
It would have, but it was the way that we had to get people to look up.
Sometimes you're stuck. Whatever. Sorry.
Tiny details.
Next
Do they
page.
matter? I love, first of all, how that first guy is not prepared for this.
Yeah, hey, look free! Like, he totally wasn't expecting the door to open and her to be right there. Yeah, and that's one of those ways, even though you can't see the faces of these agents, they're still just normal dudes.
Right.
They're just people under there, and ultimately they're not bad people either. She's afraid of them. She doesn't know what they want. They're trying to shoot her. She's terrified. But, they're just trying to stun her, and they're not bad people. So we wanted to have some humanity there.
Another thing is trying to figure out how exactly we would show motion of her, because what's happening is rather difficult.
Yeah, The challenge with doing action sequences is we tend to think visually. You know, we see things in motion in our heads. And I can imagine this sequence of her panel from like panel 2 to the end. She builds up with some strength in the legs, jumps over their heads, flips around one of their backs, using him as a post to swing around and kick the other one out the door, and then we'll use the one she's grabbed as a human shield in the next page. Okay, that makes sense visually. I can visualize that in motion. How do I pick which frozen frames of that to show you, and from what angle do I shoot them with the camera so that you can get what I'm trying to say?
Right. And I want to quick go to John's point here that Watchmen is indeed
Watchmen's
a great read, and
Watchmen's
it's
one of
got
the best reads.
awesome details. I think, unfortunately, and even Alan Moore has brought this up, is that the dark shellacked, black paint that's over Watchmen and the mood of it is something that I think permeated into comics where everything had to be really shitty and dark. And so I think when we're talking about the tropes of Watchmen, we're talking about that stuff.
The problem is Watchmen was dark for a reason, a specific reason that served the story it was telling. Modern comics are dark because Watchmen made money and people loved it. And everybody wants everything to be Watchmen. It's like in movies, when one movie makes a bunch of money and then all the other movies have to copy it, it's the formula thing.
Right.
People learned the wrong lesson from Watchmen, and that's unfortunate.
All right.
Next page. Bing.
Shooter!
Yeah,
That's-
absolutely a
yep.
subtle reference to Jurassic Park. So subtle, nobody in the world probably got it. Unless you're like us, and whenever somebody says the words shoot her, you hear that guy in Jurassic Park, shoot her! Yeah, we're dumb
It's
and
silly.
we're dorks. And
It's lame.
we have fun making comics.
Yep.
With the sound effects, the breathing, the huff breathing, sound effects are tricky. We do all of our own lettering.
Sound. Yep.
And doing sound effects takes as long, frequently, for one sound effect as lettering the entire rest of the page.
So what we try and do is we try and use them sparingly as often
Yeah.
as we can. And so one of the things that we do like to do is we almost have a lot of things within the dialogue that almost work as sound effects that emphasize words and how things are actually read
Yeah.
or how you hear them.
Yeah, it takes the vocalization and makes it the sound effect, rather than layering sound effects on top. As opposed to the ding in the last panel, some things, unless you create a sound effect for it, the audience can't hear it, doesn't know what's
For
going
instance, there might be a, panel that has a phone and the phone is ringing.
on. Right, if you don't put the ring ring, nobody knows the phone
Right.
is ringing. In this case, the ding is alerting her that the elevator's arrived. If we didn't put a ding on it, nobody'd know. But we have found that for most things that people would use sound effects for, they're just not necessary. We'll emphasize the huffing patterns of the breath here to really make that strong, make that read. We'll sometimes do it with screams when people are screaming, turn that into slightly more of a sound effect kind of a thing. But if somebody's punching a guy and I draw it well, it's not necessarily enhanced by adding, punch over top
Right.
of it.
We don't need to know that. So
Need it.
sound effects are generally something that we choose especially to use on a need-to-know basis.
Yes.
Does it enhance things, or is it
Or is it
just
just
there
there?
to be there?
Yeah, because it's comics, and comics need sound effects.
Let's move forward.
Next page. Here she gets to the warehouse, and this is where it gets weird, because why would there be a warehouse and a hospital?
All right. Can I point out how shiny that floor
That
is?
is a shiny floor.
That's a shiny
That
fucking
took
floor.
me a while. When we do our color, Comfort will color the foreground characters, set up the lighting schemes, prep the tone in a broad general
Mm-hmm.
sense. I color the backgrounds and we'll add textures. We do sound or special effects stuff pretty 50-50. Like I think
Right.
Comfort does most of Hope's stuff most of the time.
Right. The
Pretty much
glows,
all the time. But I'll do like the fire.
Yep.
So the background was on me, and I really wanted to make that floor work. I had worked in a warehouse for a lot of years, and there is something specific to the way those floors feel. And you'll see these shiny floors come up more often in later issues because I figured out a trick here that actually doesn't take a long time, but looks really cool. So we have fun with our color.
All right. So having her then show up here and then get out to the desert, this is something where we wanted her to sort of be trapped.
Yes,
So you're
middle of
finally
nowhere.
getting out and then you're stuck.
Right. She is. We want her to flee, but ultimately have nowhere to go, no escape. There's nothing she can do, and it winds up being, this opening scene is largely a metaphor for a lot of her arc through many of the opening seasons of the book. Is that she is a character who wants to be able to fly free, to set her own path. She has somebody she wants to be. She wants to get out there and live her life, but there are a series of things that are just going to keep coming up and getting in the way.
And isn't that life
That's
itself?
life, man. The walls of expectations, rules, laws, all this stuff that prevents you from just taking off and being who you want to be. What's in the box? David Peterson asks. One of them has the Ark of the Covenant, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. All right. Next page.
Yeah. John Wilson asks about why we changed from a helicarrier to a bunker. We'll get to that in part 2 when we're going through the original first issue and showing how
Yes.
the scenes used to be.
All right.
Ba-da-bum.
So again,
There she is.
feeling of hopelessness and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Of,
where are you gonna go?
where are you gonna go? You're out in the middle of the desert, and that's something, we're having Countryman bring up as an idea. And before we talk about Countryman here, this scene between this page and the next page, oftentimes when we're writing, or sometimes when we're writing, like, I think there can be little inspirations and stuff from other media or moments we've had or whatever. And this moment that we had between them, there's a movie that both of us love, and it's called LA Confidential. And there's a great scene with, I'm saying Bud White, but the Russell Crowe. Russell Crowe and Kim Basinger.
Yeah.
And those two characters, where she's asking him to come out of the rain, and it's so soft and there's so much emotion there, and such a connection between the characters. That's what, we were thinking of when we were writing this.
LA Confidential, one of our
Yeah.
favorite movies.
So everything, this is different than that, but sometimes
Yes.
you have a starting point
There's
somewhere
an emotional
else.
core that's similar. One character who's just racked with this intense emotion, the other one just trying really calmly to talk them down and
Right.
bring them in. And so this is Countryman. Countryman is a character who is getting a lot more screen time than he did in the original version. Is going to be made into a much more important character than he was in the original version. Partly because we love this guy and we always wanted to spend more time with him, but in the initial
Run, we
2008
didn't
run,
think
we
that
just-
we had the time to do it.
No,
But,
and we didn't know enough of what we were doing to be able to juggle
No.
that many characters and scenes. And
but now we do, and we're really happy to
Yeah.
have him here. And he's one of the legacy characters that we have, and
Right.
that's a shorthand. So there are some characters like telepaths who, are mostly their own thing. Most of the 7 characters, I think, with the exception of Scout, are mostly
yeah, but even
their
Scout
own
is an
thing.
amalgam of so many
Right.
things.
But still, he is a character that's absolutely trying to be
Sure.
evocative of another type of
He's an
character that
archetype.
everybody knows who we're talking about.
Countryman is an archetype. Virtue is an archetype. Ghost is an archetype. Speed
Right.
is an archetype. We've
So-
got a lot of archetypal characters in the series, and there's a reason for
Right.
that. We have a big freaking cast. We have 7 main characters that we're dealing with most of the time, and a whole brand new world that we're trying to introduce you to. And by using archetypal characters, it allows us to have a sort of a shorthand so that you can get it faster. Like, as soon as he shows up and starts talking to you, and you're like, oh, Countryman, and you're like, oh, all right, I get who this guy is. I get what he
Right.
represents.
Fantastic,
I understand his general
fantastic.
place in things without you having to tell me much.
Right.
And that way, the more time we spend with Countryman, we don't have to lay out the bare bones basics of what the character is, because you already get that. What we can do instead is explain, here's how he's different from what you expect. Here are the parts of his personality that go a different way. We're doing that a lot with Virtue, doing that a lot with Speed. Since you have this introductory concept of who the character is, it's now something that we can play with and mess with and do things you don't see coming, because you're certain you already know this person, but you don't.
Right. And I think, John, that's pretty obvious.
I mean, sure, he's inspired by all those patriotic type characters.
Right.
But the
He
idea,
is the ultimate patriotic
at the
character.
same time, we wanted to really hone in Countryman, the name Countryman. He's one of us. You know, he represents America. He's a normal guy. He mentions the name Paul is tossed around, and she initially doesn't recognize him because this countryman is the third countryman, Sean Redmond. He was the sidekick to Paul Hart, who was the second countryman who we see later in this issue. And Paul Hart had been the sidekick to the original countryman who started in World War II.
Right. And so this story is as much about legacy,
Yes.
too. So
Time.
there's history. You know, we're trying to build a world, like, if you think about how Game of Thrones or something like that builds a world for fantasy, we really wanted to build a cohesive world where things mattered for superheroes.
Yeah, and Countryman is the only unique who's ever been able to have the powers duplicated. So the very first Countryman, they were able to work out a way to pass his powers on, but it only works with like 1 out of 1,000,000 people. And so they started the Young American Project, where they were searching for who would be the next Countryman so that they could train that person up. And they found Paul Hart, who was the first Young American, and then when he became Countryman, they needed another, and that's Sean. So this is a very different kind of character than the previous.
All
Anyway,
right.
the legacy is a big thing for us, and we get into a lot of history with these characters. We try to be subtle with our world building. We try not to Gandalf it too much and just shove things in your face. Little beats like that with "No, Paul is gone. I'm Sean." That stuff. We try to keep it simple.
Right. So anyways, this is the end now
Yeah.
of the first section, and now
Now
we are
we
going
flashback.
into the flashback.
Yeah. 1994.
Right. So April 18th, 1994 is an important day, and in the series itself, there'll be many times where we're flashing back to this date or to dates very close to it.
Yeah, the New York disaster is the inciting incident that launches everything else in the series to a large extent. Even though a lot of things led up to that, that moment is the beginning of so many things. So we'll keep flashing back to it a lot,
Right.
seeing it from different people's perspectives. This is Hope's.
Right. And this here is taking place in an airport that
Yeah.
when we were younger, you know, I think we were 26 when we were
Yeah, sure.
drawing this, it was incredibly hard to draw. And that's my memories of this.
Yeah.
And this is all actually old artwork. So this is
whole
all
page.
2008 artwork.
Yeah.
Most of this that you'll be seeing is 2008 artwork.
Yeah, we touched up the color. I'm not sure that we did much. Oh, we touched up the backgrounds too. 'Cause
Yeah.
I know that I redrew some of those
Yep.
backgrounds.
And another thing that's happening that we're trying to show, it's maybe not perfect here, but, you know, 2008 us, is that this is a world where it's the past, but the technology, because of the existence of people with powers and the abilities that we had to bring technology up, you know, has changed what is available. So
Yeah.
it's old visual aesthetics with newer, more
Right.
modern, you know,
Yeah.
technological advances.
Because we thought what people believe looks cool isn't necessarily going to change. That's not always dependent on technology. We think something looks cool for a whole bevy of reasons. So just because the 90s has access to a lot more technology doesn't mean that people in the 90s are going to find a different look to be attractive. So the fashion trends, the general stylistic trends, general design trends broadly will be very similar or identical in most all cases to what was around in the 90s, but what's under the hood is going to be very different.
Right.
So that's the broad idea. The last thing about this page is, in that last panel, Hope is recognized. People know who she is. She has fans.
Well, people just would know who she is. She's
Sure.
been a sidekick to her parents,
Yep,
who are
she's
very
already a superhero
right,
now.
important cultural icons.
It made sense to us that at this point in time, most Unique's superhero characters will not have secret identities.
Right. Most Uniques in general, because that's just a normal
Well, sure.
type
and
of
you
person.
see a lot of Uniques
Right.
just around in the background. You're going to see a lot more as we move forward. Let's
move forward.
Move forward to the next
Right.
page. while we
So
talk about
this is actually a good point. Like, there's a guy up there who's just getting his ticket, or
Green
you know,
skin.
right? He's got green skin.
and a Bulls jersey.
There's you know, little things. Oh man, I think the it's very sad because we had to
trimmed out a
rearrange.
piece of it. You'll see it in the old cut. We had Scions using their telekinesis to move bags around, and check the luggage. We have the guy with the X-ray vision giving a scan for people
Right.
as they pass.
By the way,
through.
that's Robert Kirkman there.
That is Robert.
That's
That is
also
being
the
followed by Neil Gaiman.
And then
further
behind
down
that-
the line, after the pregnant elf girl, is
Ryan Utley.
Ryan Otley, because we're stupid big Invincible fans, and
And also,
Because Neil Gaiman
we
is the
get
best.
bored when we're doing this.
we get really bored.
Drawing background characters sucks balls,
Yeah,
guys.
it's really rough. And so to keep ourselves entertained, we'll put people we know in the background, or people we
Right.
like, or just something to keep it more fun.
Right. So, all these pages that have been happening, and we're about to go into even more, is like, it's so plot heavy.
Yeah.
It's a balancing act of being plot heavy while then trying to get character out there.
Yeah.
And the character that we're trying to get out is, the relationship between parents and a teenage daughter.
Teenage daughter who's going to be a pain because teenagers. We're also establishing little things that'll come up later, like that her sister Conscience is not a superhero, doesn't want to be a superhero. Here's an interesting thing to talk about. Color. So if you look at the difference in the airport color compared with panel 3 in the UN, we're trying to use distinctive color tones to make it clear when you change locations, so that we don't have to put like caption boxes over
Right,
top of
which would be a
everything.
real pain in the ass.
Yes.
And there wouldn't be room for it, especially with how we tend to write dialogue.
Yeah, also true.
Yep.
But it's just you want a quick visual thing so that people can subconsciously keep track of where you are and not get lost, and just enjoy the story.
And even different parts of the airport, too. They're not all the same color. She's moving through different things. Different things have different light. And so being aware of that, allows us to feel like space is being moved through, treaded. Right.
John brings up that we're the opposite of X-Men because we're not hiding. One of the things from the beginning of our design of Uniques is to say, well, let's move past the world hates and fears them
Right,
stage.
because that's such a
everybody
ongoing
wants to be
thing, and it
there.
never
Even
sort of...
DC is doing that with
Yeah.
the Justice League now. Like, really? No, we moved past that. That happened. That was part of the civil rights movement through the 60s and 70s and into the 80s.
And much like, those things want to come up every once in a while,
Sure.
there's still going to be people
And
who
they're-
have backwards thoughts
Yes.
about things. That's just
Absolutely.
reality.
Just because legislation has been passed and they have protections and rights and things doesn't mean that those rights are always going to be respected or that people aren't still going to be assholes. But we wanted to get to the acceptance phase. We wanted to get to the regular phase where they're just part of this world.
All right.
That would be much more interesting.
Let's move
They don't do
forward
that enough.
because we are talking a lot.
You haven't seen, I know. The speech, writing the speech here was tricky because if you want to write, when you're writing a speech, speeches have a certain cadence to them. They have a certain feeling to them. But they'll tend to use way more words than you can use in a comic script.
Right. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, what is important? What do I need to get out?
Yeah.
Like, what are the things that the audience needs to know? Because the audience did not come here to read your goddamn speech. They came here to read a comic,
Yeah.
get some information, and move forward. And so how do you do that in an interesting enough way that gets things done and
Yeah.
it's fun
The
and
important
poppy
thing
and happy?
is you know what you're trying to get to, you know what your theme is, you know what your point
Right.
is, and you try to find the best way to make that.
And that's where a lot of your planning and stuff goes through. So you don't just sit down and start writing. You say, what am I trying to say? What's the importance
the more
of
you
this?
know what you're trying to accomplish,
Right.
the less you're going to verbally meander.
What
when you
are
get
the
there.
beats that have to be hit? And if you have those things laid out, you can be a lot more tighter and more interesting.
In the airport or the airplane panel, panel 5, it was a lot of fun looking up 90s fashion to dress the incidental background characters. That was a good time.
I like looking at a lot of Party of Five.
Party of 5 stuff. I like the girl with the like two-tone hair and the Abercrombie top, or no, Tommy Hilfiger top.
There.
The grunge stuff. Everywhere there are so many people in flannel in this book.
It is 1994.
And there in the panel you see old Countryman, the last Countryman.
Yeah, so Paul Hart, and with Comrade,
who we don't get to spend a lot of time.
No, we don't get to spend a lot of time with, but, it's just another little
Yep.
piece, boop, of the world.
Note.
You don't have to spend forever with it, but it just gives you a
Yep.
taste.
Next page. Here we have Kiloton making his entrance. Important to note, Kiloton is not alone. There are a number of people all standing up at the same time. You can sort of see their heads glowing in the background and stuff.
Tiny things that may be missed.
Maybe missed,
by-
yeah. But we're trying to we're trying not to hit you in the face with it. We're trying to respect our audience enough that we don't have to be so blunt.
Right. And also, these are all costumes that these characters, like they're older costumes.
Yes,
they're
so if you
older
look at the
version
last
of their
panel,
costumes.
The last panel has, the characters circa 94. And so Virtue especially is one you're going to see later. And he'll look a little bit different because comics like to do subtle costume shifts over time.
But also people do subtle shifts.
That too.
Another thing is this is the UN. This is also, a big meeting between lots and lots of people from all
Yes.
around the world. So the idea is that the biggest heroes from around the world, as well as the world leaders, are here at this
Yeah.
summit.
If we get to this next panel,
Right.
you can see more of these characters flying in and doing their thing. The armored character is Centurion, John. You're going to see much more Centurion-related business later on.
Exactly.
The actual Centurion there doesn't make it out.
He
of the
doesn't
UN.
make it out. All
He
these
dies in the
characters that you
explosion.
just saw, they're dead,
Pretty
except
much
for
everybody here
Virtue.
is dead, except Virtue and Speed and Katie, who is rescued here. Little bitty Kid Quick when she's so
Right.
tiny with her little pigtails poofing out.
Also, notice Celerity in the background.
Panel 3, Celerity in panel 3, right under the African prince's knee, is rescuing people. You're going to see more of Celerity doing her thing and what she was doing in this moment in issue 6, I believe.
The African prince. And it is intentional. It's not a mistake that we're saying the African prince.
Yes. Africa is a very different place in the Uniques world. We're taking a very long time to talk much about it because we want to get it right. But there is a thing known as the African Empire in the Uniques world.
All right.
and it's
Not all
awesome.
the countries in the world of Uniques are as
exactly
they
the
are
same.
now.
The world itself has a lot of distinct differences. So to close off on the Centurion point, there will be more Centurions after. After he dies, he leaves it as part of his final declaration that on his death, his armor is granted to the United Nations. There becomes this Centurion Corps where each member of the UN Security Council, each nation gets their own suit of Centurion armor, and they get to send representatives to the Corps, and it becomes a whole thing. It's really cool, and I'd love to do more with the Centurion Corps. We'll see.
Right. So let's move forward.
As you're probably guessing by now, we come up with way more cool, unique stuff than we could ever possibly do in one book.
But that I think is part of, hopefully will be the charm of the book, is that it feels like a great world to splash around in.
Yeah.
And so everybody can think of what else would exist, because it's not even just America. Like American, Marvel, DC comics are usually like, there's American heroes and nobody else.
Yeah.
But in our world, we really tried to say everyone, everywhere, has uniques, which again are just people with powers, and then there are people who choose to use those powers, to fight things.
Yeah, like I love the giant man in there who I imagined being Pakistani. Mm-hmm. Just this enormous,
Right. Every one of these, heroes in the background
all
and
of them
stuff,
are
we
from
all
different
had,
nationalities.
ideas and places and stuff that they might be
Also,
in.
there's a ton
Yep.
of stuff happening in the background. I don't know how close you guys get into these panels when you're looking at home, but we can get really close. So, like over here on the side, you've got the Russian Cossack hero choking a dude out. You got this fist fight over there. The African prince grabbing a guy. In the back here, Comrade is just hacking somebody with his
With
hammer.
a
just
sickle.
boom!
Yeah.
That heavy hammer blow. There's so much stuff happening in the background of all these pages. That is fun for us. That makes action much more entertaining.
Right. It actually feels like, you want it to feel like there is chaos.
Yeah.
And that's important.
It's also a little bit of the Chris Baccello influence,
Yeah.
because He's the guy who made me really love comic art that rewards you every time you look at it. There's always something new to see, something new to notice going on in it.
All right.
So if people want to spend a lot of time looking at our pages, I want you to be rewarded for that. David asked if there's a top 10 influence. Not really.
We didn't really read a lot of top. I don't even remember the story.
I read the first story
I know it
arc,
exists.
I think, of top 10. Like, I had the first trade paperback way back when. I didn't super get into it. It was cool enough. And I could see how there would be some relations between top 10 and what we're doing with Uniques, but we didn't read enough of it for it to be
I
strong.
will say that I like to think a little bit about not top 10, but the Kurt Busiek Astro City.
Astro
Right.
City is probably a stronger connection.
Yep. All right, move forward.
And so we've absolutely considered a guidebook.
We have to have the time.
We
for
have
all
to have the
these
time.
things.
Yeah, no kidding. We are already...
Someday, I think when you've got the first couple of seasons out of Uniques,
like the first 20 issues.
right? Because there's not quite enough yet.
Until then, we are building a very large and robust character section
Right.
on our
So you'll be
website
able
when
to
it
read
comes
about
out.
many of
There's
the
going to be a
characters.
lot of stuff there.
All right.
Next up.
This is a moment for us where we decided to draw something where the characters are just like you. When you know that you're not going to make it, like it's unlikely. You're going to fight till your last, but you are aware that the likelihood that you will succeed is basically zero.
We got a lot of mixed responses to the death of Mentor and Kinetic in the initial release, because there were a number of people who thought that were frustrated that it seemed like they're just giving up. They just quit and let it happen. And no, they're doing the best they can, but sometimes you just know you're not going to make it.
Right. Now, also in the initial release, when we do that, you'll see the difference between what we have.
We'll show the difference. It is
Right.
It is different. The initial release, the whole UN sequence was much, much faster. Here
As
they have a
in
little
one
more
page
time
with
to
14 panels.
well, not just in terms of that,
Right.
but I mean in terms of the event was shorter for the characters.
Right.
Like, he basically walked in and blew up, and that was it. There wasn't time for anybody to interact and fight and
Right.
try to struggle or do anything. So the expanded cut here gives a little bit more time, but not a lot more hope. That was the idea, that we're seeing these people in the last moments when they know they're going to die, even though they're doing everything they can to prevent it. It's just not going to be enough.
And I want to point out the saying of the beginning of the end. And this is another thing that, we really feel like is starting to create the narrative for the story. And it's something that we took from Battlestar Galactica, which had a lot of great little sayings through it.
Sure.
Even Game of Thrones does the same thing and stuff like that. And I think those sayings that are brought up can remind the audience of some kind of thing.
Well, it also
some kind
ties
of feeling.
into one of the core concepts of Uniques is that this is the beginning of the third act of the story. Because traditional superhero comics are sort of stuck in the second act forever. They give you the first act and they introduce the characters. Then they move into the second act where they complicate things. And they just stay there forever. So we're like, all right, let's skip to Act 3 and see this world in the beginning of the final act of its story. And so right from the first issue, we're giving you that idea that this is the start of the end of things.
And we turn the page, and everything is destroyed. And it's important to note that there's not only one big explosion that happens with the UN,
There
but
are 4 that we can see, and even more mayhem going on.
So the idea is that all of New York, as well as the surrounding boroughs, which would be things like, the Bronx and, Brooklyn and stuff like that, are all being destroyed. Everything that is New York is done.
It's a big event.
Not Jersey, though, but Jersey is going to be pretty bombed out and shitty
Jersey's
still.
going to have trouble.
It's going to have a lot of trouble.
And then Telepath here is going down because of the psychic shockwave, which we'll be finding out about shortly. In this explosion, the shockwave goes out that kills every Scion on the planet except for Telepath, who very nearly dies, but manages to
We can
survive
talk
somehow.
about that again.
Because here she is.
Right, here we are. So this is another cut that I like, just cutting to something that's quiet.
So quiet, yeah. From
Right.
insanity to this perfectly peaceful. Like
Right.
I can almost hear the birds chirping, kind
Right.
of peacefulness.
Right. Even though there are no birds there because they're deep, deep underground again.
Yeah.
So, finding a way, I think, in your story to be able to cut to things and then having a stark enough cut that makes you feel like, okay, I'm in this other place, I'm in this other environment, this other thing's
Clearly,
happening.
yeah, it's clear.
Right. It's the contrast that's really important. So the audience is always keyed into what's going on.
No, David, there will never be time-altering powers, because time-altering powers are bullshit, and I don't like writing time travel stories, except for the time travel story that we want to write someday.
Right. But that will be fine because in the world
It's kind
that
of
we're
meant to be
creating,
ridiculous,
right.
but in the case of Uniques, no. Time-altering powers ruin everything.
All right, so there is no time travel.
So no, nothing like that.
In Uniques. All right.
Countryman, we wanted Countryman to be a different sort of character than you expect. He's much softer. He's much more casual, more relaxed, I think. You would expect the, leader of American heroes to be very stuffy, I suppose. But I don't want...
We
didn't
wanted
want him
modern
to be-
Countryman, I think, to feel very modern.
Yeah.
Like he is a modern man that's been growing
And
up,
youthful.
and youthful in the 90s. So he's in his mid-20s right now.
Or latter 20s,
right,
probably.
Exactly. The way they play Steve Rogers makes sense for Steve Rogers because
Sure.
that doesn't mean that every patriotic hero has to be
Right.
the same personality.
Yeah, Sean is not from the 40s. He's, a young guy, 96, and we wanted him to feel like it. We also wanted to create the strong history between these two characters because, Hope and her friend Motherboard and little kid Quick, the children of the League of Seven, were always at danger, and so their babysitter was the young American, which was always hilarious to us. Countryman, as a kid, when he was a teenager, he babysat Hope and crew when they were little bitty.
So again, history, legacy, connection, giving a sense of what that is, and sort of then moving forward and allowing the audience to sort of fill in those blanks.
Yeah. Sam brings up a point. Goodbye to the one real-world city that traditional superhero comics acknowledge the existence of. And you know what? It wasn't intentional at the time, but I could absolutely see a perfectly valid argument for how us destroying New York is sort of a metaphor for us trying to break away from traditional
I
superhero
always felt
structures.
like it was to some
Yeah.
degree because everything always takes place in New York in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And it gets to be, I think, exhausting. So finding a way to do something different and also go through the actual rebuilding of a city, because New York gets destroyed, seriously, every other weekend in the world of Marvel or DC.
Yeah. So here we create a brief real-world explanation or some vague attempt at an explanation for why her muscles aren't completely atrophied. That she went into sort of a healing trance kind of thing, which tracks with David's thing about her being more of a Jedi than a
That's true. That's true.
telekinetic. But we wanted to say something, even if it's just a quick offhanded kind of reference. There's a lot of little touches of world building going on in here. President Gingrich is a thing that happened.
It was.
In our world,
The first Bush
George H.W. Bush
was assassinated.
was successfully assassinated.
Yes.
Newt Gingrich had been the vice president
Right.
instead of Potato Man.
Why am I blanking
And so
on his name?
Dan Quayle
Dan Quayle, thank you.
instead of Dan Quayle. So
Yep.
Gingrich ascended to the presidency, and then he died in the UN disaster.
Right. And so his vice president, Harrison, is now, which is a creation that we've
Harrison
done.
is an all-new character.
Right. There are people of history that we'll be bringing in, but we would try and play that very carefully.
It also means that I think we have written out of existence the first Clinton administration.
We have written out of
We
this,
have, and that
yep.
makes me sad.
I'm sorry.
First Clinton
All right.
administration.
Other little things. So there's little tiny bits that are going to come in. Like
Current?
we're talking about Current. Current's going to be coming back. You'll hear that name over and over again when we'll be paying something off even in that this season with that.
Yep.
where we didn't before.
And the idea that Hope is the last scion
Right. And so scions are people who
with
have
mental powers.
and there's nobody else with mental powers but her now.
And you'll run into some characters that have things that seem psionic, like Venus, one of our characters, Venus, who shows up in the
goth
second
girls.
story arc with the goth girls. She can control people with her voice, but it's not a mental thing. It's like a pheromone thing and a vibrational frequency of the voice. It's complicated, but it's not mental powers.
All right.
So you'll see things that are close, but all people with genuine mental powers are gone, except for Hope.
All right. Let's move forward. And this is the family stuff here.
Family is super important to us.
Right. Again, dealing with legacy and stuff like that. So even though it wasn't a direct influence, I think characters like Motherboard's parents and stuff, like we always mean to be like the Weasleys were in Harry Potter.
Yep.
You know, somebody who's stable.
Motherboard's family are
right.
kind of a lot like the Weasleys. Like if the Weasleys were a tech junkie family, full of gadgeteers and computer geniuses, there's kind of a lot of that there. There's a bunch of kids. There's like 3 kids, I guess, and then, you know, we don't know how big the clan gets beyond their particular branch of the tree, but I could see them being very Weasley.
But anyway, the point is that, you know, they're very friendly. They're there to be sort of stable and stuff. When you have, I think, characters who are largely young, which our characters are in their teens, you have to have some adult role somewhere.
I also think that too often family is something that's ignored in superhero comics. The family is the rest of the superheroes a lot of times. Like Teen Titans use each other as a surrogate family, but a lot of them don't have families to go back to. And we want to make more of a supporting cast out of the role of family in your life.
This is our introduction of Kid
Katie,
Quick
grown
now.
up. Yep.
Older, so we saw her little. If you go back to those UN pages,
Yep.
you see her little. She's got pigtails. She's
She
being
hasn't
saved.
changed a lot in
No.
the last 2 years. She is just as hyper and excitable, and one of our favorite characters to write, Little Kid Quick. Next page.
So much family stuff. I love Katie running in there and you know doing the big lump.
Yep.
Also, the sister is a
Yes.
shapeshifter and
She's
adopted.
Conscience Sage is not a natural born sage. She was adopted by the parents when they were when she was extremely young, like a little bitty kid. And the form that Conscience takes, her blonde self, she takes because she wants to look like she was a part of the family, like she was born to them. And that's not the shape that she took normally before. That's why there's a question in her mind over whether or not Hope would have recognized her. But I think after her parents died, it became even more important to her that she felt like she was a literal part of the family.
We'll be dealing a lot eventually with
Conscience is going to be a big part of the story.
in a while.
In a while. It takes when you're planning a 100-issue series,
And you know where
things
you're
take some
going
time.
with each season.
Things take some time.
That's right.
So yeah, this was a fun sequence.
So it's a fun sequence, and we wanted to sort of end the main part of, you know, the main thrust of the story here on a happy note before we go into sort of the epilogue that is a little bit more of a down note.
We end with hopefulness and then cut to what feels an awful lot like villainous monologuing. I mean, who but a bad guy would literally lower the needle onto the dramatic music as he starts talking?
Music and sound and stuff is something we do like using. Eventually, when we get our new website out, which if you're listening to this later, you might
Perhaps
already
it's
have gotten
there.
this on that website.
Yeah, we've put together Spotify playlists for all the issues so that you can go by page numbers and have music to listen to.
All right, so the music of Swan Lake that's being put down, it will be in the Spotify thing, but
Which
I
is
think
so cool.
listening,
It's one of my favorite classical
listening to this with that music, you know, helps set the tone and the mood, and that's what our bad guy here is doing. And we literally just call him the Man in Shadows.
Yeah, if you looked at one of the scripts, it would just say Man in Shadows. You see New York getting rebuilt here already, a lot of progress made. You'll appreciate how much when you see the opening for the next issue, when we talk about that. But yeah, the powers of superheroes allow for great and terrible destruction. They also allow for some pretty amazing feats of reconstruction. So the rebuilding of New York is happening at an incredible rate.
Right. And another thing, too, if we turn the page here, it's
Sure.
important to sort of note that, you know, when you're writing, and this is our outro, you know, sort of, what would you call it? Not a soliloquy, but monologue.
Yeah.
And this monologue, like when you're writing it and you're seeing visuals that go to it, I think the trick often is to try and find a way to make every single image that you're seeing, you know, in that montage fit to some degree with that monologue.
Yeah.
And so even if you're looking at the third panel there
Yeah.
and the question that's being asked.
When most of the capes are dead and gone, what's left? Vigilantes and thugs. And here's a shot of Quake and Singe, who, let's be honest, are thuggish vigilantes, especially at this point in the story.
So, you know, every time we're getting a new panel and we're sort of seeing an introduction of different characters, we're seeing an introduction of Covet that's going to come with the Goth Girl
And
stuff.
for those who don't know, all these characters you're seeing in these pages are all going to be very significant to the story very soon. So, yeah, we wanted to establish that this is going to be more than just Hope's story, and we hoped by laying this stuff in now, you would get that
Right.
sense.
So as we turn the page, then what we get is the, you know, ending of that monologue, but then also the reveal of the end of the story. And this is where I think the difficulty is in writing a good issue 1, you know, which hopefully we've written,
never know
is
for
getting
sure.
something that people will read and enjoy, but there's something at the end, there's sort of an asterisk to it that makes the audience want to come back for
Yeah.
more. Something in the story is not what you thought it was.
Yeah. Before we move into that too much, I really like the little photo of the Sage
yes.
family.
I like the photo of the
Little
Sage.
bitty Hope in her costume, and she's just so serious. That's her in a nutshell. Adorable, and yet so very serious.
So very determined to be
Yeah.
adult-like before she's ready.
So, connecting Countryman to the shadowy man, our hope is that raises questions. That's what we want, because by now, ideally, you like Countryman. He's a nice guy. He's sweet. He's polite. He's, I don't know.
He's a
charming.
good friend
He's
to
a-
the
he's a
character,
nice,
the
friendly guy.
protagonist that we have been following
And the fact
through
that
this
he's
story.
here and that he's arguing on Hope's behalf, this is obviously not a simple villainy plot. It feels villainy. They're talking about the end of things, but something is clearly going on that's more than just some shadowy bad guy talking about shadowy bad guy things.
Right. So what we're trying to do is build a mystery, make you wonder what's going on, and then again, hopefully you're interested enough to come back
wanna
for
see
the
more.
story. And then we bring it up here one more time, the idea of the beginning of the
Yep.
end.
I think we literally call it the start of the third act.
Yep.
I mean, can't put a finer point on it than that.
So there
and
we go.
no, Kanasu, they're not turking your gerbs.
I
There are
love
plenty
it.
of normal people that are also involved with the reconstruction effort. And the
It just happens
rapid
faster.
reconstruction is putting a lot of money in the pockets of manufacturing all around the state. Madison City, which is the main hub of all the events in this series, Madison City is having a friggin' boom time thanks to all of the construction jobs and all of the
Right.
people that are, staying there on their way out.
And the idea is that if you do have superheroes and there are people who knock down buildings and stuff like that from time to time, although we try very hard to make sure that does
Property
not
damage
often happen,
is not just
Right.
going to be a casual event.
there's a way that you can rebuild things without it taking, the next 12 years.
It would wreck society. Like, you just
Right.
couldn't let that happen. If there was a Hulk stomping around and you only had our world's level of construction ability, one bad
There's-
Hulk tirade could cost you
There's no way to combat that.
years and
Yeah.
years to fix. And how often does that dude rampage across the countryside? So, no, we had, in order for there to be a balance, and that's a lot what we try to do when we're constructing the Unique's world, is create a balance. We had to have a way that things could be repaired, if not as easily as they're destroyed, at least in such a way as, you know, one terrible event isn't going to just wreck the world.
Although
economy.
the world economy, I think, took a real dump
This is
after New York, because
no,
New
it did, and
right.
and you see how big an event that is. It has to be that scale to have that broad of an impact, which is exactly what Kiloton was after.
All right, so I think that is good here
Yeah.
for the first commentary. Now, if you'll excuse me, audience, this was great, but I have to pee.
Well, that's very.
That's a way to
Honestly,
end that sucker.
So now I'm going to bring up the original first issue from way back in the halcyon days of 2008, which means that this was being produced in 2007. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. On the left, the original Unique's #1. Hey, Ken made it. Good to see you, Kenny. So, the original cover was a similar idea in terms of, you know, going for the collage, but much more sparse. And the first issue, the original first issue, is actually now the first 2 issues of the extended director's cut. So we're only going to talk about a handful of pages from this before we cut it off and leave the rest for the issue 2 commentary later. So here we're building up more characters and trying to establish more stuff, but still a lot of the basics of the design are still in place. We clearly had a solid idea of where we wanted to go with this. Different headshots, but still the same aesthetic. So we opened originally with young Hope doing her superhero stuff. Again, in the interest of establishing a status quo. We want to say this is what Hope does with her days. And this is where she was instead of being at the airport. So even in the new version, when she's at the airport, her parents are complaining that you're not here when you're supposed to be. You're not in the UN with us. Why not? Well, this is where she was. She was off breaking up some kind of a meth lab or something.
I'm sure if we would have, and hello again. I'm out of the bathroom.
She made it.
I'm really pleased I got to pee at the end.
Relief.
It was tough.
Oh my Lanta.
So, anyways, yes, oh my Lanta, indeed. You know, this scene here, I think we really bring into the new issue 2 that we have.
Yeah.
So,
even reusing the meth lab aesthetic.
right.
When we see the new adult Hope doing her superheroing. But I do miss getting to see Little Hope. Hopefully we'll get more chances.
I'm
for these
sure
kinds of
we'll do
flashbacks in
some
the future.
flashback. Like, we're doing a lot more flashbacks than we were before.
That's true.
We used to stop it at old issue 6, and now we're continuing. So,
Yeah. So Little Hope fighting when she goes to the airport.
Excuse me.
And look at how many more panels we used to squeeze onto every page.
Mother
How
of
much more
God.
text we squeeze onto every panel. If I had to use one word to describe old Unique, it would be busy.
Dense. In a
Dense.
bad way.
Yes, dense.
And this too here is, I think, actually the lettering that we went back into and edited. So this is
even better lettering. Than
Right.
the
It was
original
really bad before.
You can see some of these backgrounds, like in this panel here, the second to last panel on the new version. If you look at what is the 4th panel in the original,
Yeah.
compare these backgrounds, just much nicer. I think some of it also has to do with us having been to more airports by the time we were doing the new
Also,
version.
I think the light and the color and stuff like that
Oh,
is
yeah,
just
just
better. So there's a
broadly.
lot of things that are better. All right. So moving forward,
And you can see here's this panel compared
Mhm.
to the same.
this, yep.
We're just much stronger. Oh, and panel 2, this is Jeff Scott Campbell.
Yep. But he got cut out.
And girlfriend. But he got cut in the new version.
Sorry.
Sorry, Jeff. It's not because we like you any less. I swear. Yeah, so...
Same sort of
here's
things.
the panel 4 on the old version on the right. You'll see the girl lifting and moving the bags with her powers.
We promised that
So
that was
we
a
did
thing.
want to have more powers just going on in the background,
Yeah.
showing how
You can
normal
also
people doing normal jobs. They just happen to have powers.
You can also see how much more background, say, in the newer version we put in on the second to last panel
Yeah.
there, that one there, versus the same panel of her going through security with the X-ray vision. You know,
Yep.
just little details again like that. It takes a little bit more time.
It takes a little more time, and again, I think that I really do chalk a lot of this up to us having been in
Right.
more airports and knowing more what it's like to be there. We've spent a lot of time in airports at this point, and it feels dense and busy when you're going through bag check. There's a lot of people there, and not having those crowds just felt weird to
Yep,
us.
and yes, so many fewer panels. Now, this is important. The new establishing shot of the UN
Yep.
versus the old establishing shot. Like, if you look at those chairs and stuff, and this is the thing, it's fine,
Yeah.
but it's not
it's only-
great.
it's only okay.
Fine. It's okay.
We definitely shrimped out on our...
Shrimped out.
Skimped out. I think, is it
Skimped?
Skimped. That's the one. We skimped on our backgrounds originally because nobody likes drawing backgrounds.
Especially not us.
No. If I wanted to draw backgrounds, I'd be an architect. I like drawing people, and the backgrounds is the stuff you have to put up with in order to get to draw.
But the
more
mark
people.
of a real artist is how well you draw the things you don't like.
Exactly. So we are definitely investing much more heavily in the
Right.
backup stuff. John brings up a lot fewer panels. Absolutely,
Yes.
brother. That was one of our biggest problems. We just tried to cram way too much. You're going to see that in a second.
Oh, good.
So look at how busy this speech is. How
And again,
much
this is
text.
cut down and
this, yeah,
edited.
to the right is slightly edited from what its original release was. Very slightly. It's mostly changing how we did.
Did you mean
talk
to
about
move
it.
forward on that one?
No,
Yeah.
I guess I didn't.
All right.
Yeah, so the speech is
right.
much more condensed.
All right, basically same panels. We actually moved some of the stuff from the page that's going to
Yeah.
come up after this into the new version of the page.
True.
Yep.
Here we have Little Scout, who
Mm-hmm.
you unfortunately don't get to see, but you'll see him in a flashback in the third issue.
Right, you can move forward on
Little
the-
Scout still gets to stay.
But-
the color is just so much richer.
It is. It really is. It's so gray in comparison.
Yeah.
So this here is the old version and the new version. You can see in the old version that we're going to go through. Basically, Kiloton shows up, they try and do something, and he blows up, and that's it. So all the other action that you saw in that previous issue just doesn't even play in.
Yeah. A good note on the talk bubbles here. Our old talk bubble, something we didn't know very well, is that the best shape to create for a talk bubble is one that is a slightly squared off oval. Before, if you look at this last panel on the old page, we tended to go very wide, very wide and ovular with our talk bubbles.
And that left a whole lot of space on the
lot of
top,
dead
bottom,
space.
and oftentimes sides.
Yeah. Compare that, like even just looking at the psionic talk bubbles here compared to here, the space is utilized much more efficiently. It looks nicer, but it doesn't take up as much room on the page, which is what's really important.
Right.
Now we get to what I think of as Adam's Folly. Adam's Folly is a one-page sequence that in the new version of Uniques takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, I guess 3 pages
Three.
fully before we get to the explosion. 3 pages to do what initially I'd try to do in one. Now here's the idea, because I did have an idea here. The idea was the panels get a little bit smaller every time and a little bit farther apart every time. So I was thinking very cinematically and in terms of like creating a rhythm. Boom, 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 boom. Because smaller panels read faster. You spend less time looking at each one, and so you're moving more quickly. However, space between panels causes you to slow down more and makes it feel like it's taking more time to get to the next moment. So it's almost like those movie trailers, you know, when they start with the heavy drum parts, boom, boom, and then slow down the like black screen flash shot. It seems like a neat idea in my head. It doesn't work at all on the page,
No.
especially for a moment that's this important. That's this
And
crucial.
that's really the thing, is how crucial and important the moment is, and the big things that are happening are really taking place in itty bitty teeny tiny panels.
Yeah.
And they can't breathe, and that is the difference between the new version and the old version. And that really, this is so representative of so much of the early version of Uniques, is that there was a ton of panels with a ton of shit in each and every one. It was just overwhelming, and you needed a magnifying glass to see what was going on in each panel.
One of the reasons that we went into the extended director's cut was because when we talked to our professional friends, whose opinions we really trusted, and they would read the series and they'd say, I love it. But almost to a person they would say, it doesn't really get good until Volume 2. I wasn't sure at Volume 1 what I was going to think, but Volume 2, that really got good. And that's a problem, because people are going to start with your first volume. They're going to start with your first issue, and if you give them a garbled mess that's hard to read, and look at all this text, you get to a page like that, it feels like homework. Nobody wants to read all that.
So
they're not going to stick
right.
with you to the next issue. They're not going to keep reading to get
Right.
to the good
So
part.
that's why it was imperative that we went back, and especially since everybody reads from issue 1 these
Yeah.
days. Before, like, I understand the argument that a lot of people made to us, like, don't bother going back, because everybody will start at this, magical forward, point that you make. And that's not true. Everybody, because you're not beholden to, say, how you would used to read comics, where you would, go to the comic shop and get whatever was available. Everything is available now. And so that's why it was on us to make something that if you read that first issue, you could enjoy it, you could like it, and you want to read more.
Yeah. Here's a small touch that I actually kind of miss. In the original, you get a small row of panels here showing all the other Scions dying at the same time. So
You don't know exactly what's going
You don't know
on.
what you're looking at, but hopefully people would get to the part about the last Scion and all that, and then be like, oh, that's what that was during the explosion. And one of these panels, the second to last death, is actually the character Michael and his father. His father was a Scion, died during the shockwave.
Right.
And we'll get to that flashback later. It's a little sad to miss it. I know why we lost it, but yeah.
Well, we lost it because we wanted to show.
We wanted to focus.
We wanted to focus on the characters we
Yeah.
actually cared about, rather
Exactly.
than some random people we
That
didn't
makes
know what
sense.
was going on. It was a
And
nice
this is-
idea, but it
It's
didn't
something-
work.
When you're building a big world like this, we fall prey to it a lot. We're so interested in showing other side characters and other stuff in the world that it can detract from the main cast, which is who people actually care about. So a lot of times we have reduced the number of external characters.
How do you
we're using.
simplify?
Streamline it down so that we can give more stuff to the main cast, because that's who ultimately matters the most.
All right, let's move forward.
So now we get to this.
So now we have to backtrack in the old version. There we go.
Yeah, you can see how we got a slightly more dynamic version.
Now, the text here at the bottom of that panel, that was inspired by how they would do text in the Heroes series.
Yeah, Heroes did it best, but there were a couple other people that were doing it too. And the idea
Right.
was, the title of the issue would be somehow woven into the background of the actual
It's a
visuals.
very nice idea, but
Nice idea, ugh, didn't work. And as soon as we got to the second issue, we realized how hard it was going to be to try and choreograph that every single time.
Right.
So we decided, since we already have the title page at the start of the damn thing, why are we putting the credits in all over again?
Right.
It was just a waste.
man, our dates are different too. I didn't even
Did we?
realize.
Yeah. We scaled it back a little bit.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah.
You can also see we did some body adjustments to Telepath. You're going to see a lot of that going on. We wanted her to be thicker overall. We'd always wanted her to be thicker of build.
But we were not good enough artists
Good
back
enough
then.
at drawing it. Guidelines. Okay, David's asking, did we have any guidelines as we reworked, re-edited, etc., so that we were doing what we needed to while not going too far? It's something we just had to feel out for the most part.
I think we had to feel it out, but we knew where, again, it's about planning it ahead of time. Like, we have a certain guideline, like we read the issues and we say, well, here's the problem parts. Like, we knew that we needed a poppier opening. So we put what was the middle of the old issue one
Right
at
up
the
front.
beginning. So you get a cool, interesting opening.
Drops you right into the middle
Drops
of the
you
story.
right in, puts you in the place of the protagonist. It's great, it works. And so there are certain things like that, and then you're going through the art, and like I think we made like sticky notes going through the whole thing to be like, this is great, but you know what? This is just, there's so many problems in it. We're going to redraw this. This story point is good, but it is not worked out.
Like, if you look at this, most of these panels are largely reused. There are a couple things that got changed. We used to have the idea of these neural blockers that would actually be physical implants in a person's head. We decided that
They didn't need it anymore.
that wasn't a useful technology. We're keeping neural blockers, but they're going to be a little different. They'll show up later. So we got rid of that, but otherwise...
Look at the face, though.
same.
Look at the
Face
difference of the face. The face,
it's
the
just
person
in the
is the
eyes.
same, but making them more intense. The other one is a far more placid face.
Second panel is basically exactly the same. Third panel, we needed to make a shift, partly because space reasons. Space is usually the big one. We try to think in terms of what is the most important panel, and that panel gets the most size, and that we weren't doing very well originally.
All right, so in the original page, look how tiny, itty-bitty, not that panel is, but the one where she's pushing the nurse
Yeah,
away.
The nurse shove needs
Right.
to be a bigger moment to feel stronger. So we zoomed in, we cropped and adjusted her position on the panel, and then redrew stuff to connect. Generally speaking, I know that's not a great answer because we don't have a specific calculus that we do other than how long is this going to take, how many things absolutely have to be redone, whether it's because it's a brand new scene and thus is getting drawn from scratch, or because the original just doesn't work at all and has to have a lot of work to get it fixed. Based on that, how much more can we really afford to do? And if it's an issue that has a lot of new material, then the old material that we keep is going to stay as much the same as we possibly can,
Right.
just for time reasons.
Yep.
So that's the biggest thing, thinking about time.
Moving
notice
forward,
also
yep.
how much more bouffant Telepath
Yes.
hair used to be. This was a problem I had. I used to draw hair very big.
Adam's mom is a hairdresser, and Adam's mom loves big hair.
Big
And so
hair.
Adam had a thing where he would enjoy drawing
I drew
big hair.
and I don't think it was my mom's fault. I wouldn't blame that. It's just you look at a lot of comic book heroines, and they've got like the big,
The
hair,
big
the
90s hair.
voluminous
It was
90s
very voluminous. Every lady in comics has the giant hair.
Yeah, I had to get away from that.
So,
That's me getting better. The psionic scene where she's reading the orderly's mind to see what had happened in the intervening years, this is just a much more interesting presentation of that. It makes it more clear. Also, we're seeing some hints of things in here that are a lot more interesting.
that will come back later. There's so many details.
There's literally stuff in here that's not like going to come back for 50 issues, you guys. We are laying it in
We're
deep.
good planners.
Added in the orderly commanding these guys in that panel. The no gets its own on the next page. I mean, the amount of space that we're doing to
Right.
pad this out. to
And
help
changing the
rhythm.
colors and stuff like that. Like some changes are simple, like the color changes and stuff, and some of them can be more difficult.
Oh, here's a little thing. In her new fall down panel, because she does the big psychic shockwave, we took out the lights. Like, she does such a big shockwave that the lights went out. And now she's in the darkness, and the view monitor over here has been shattered. So it's the little touch, little details that we didn't think of before. And a good example of using her text as a sound effect rather than adding the wham sound
Right.
effect from before. That just works better.
Scroll down on the new version side. There you go. That brings you to where we are here.
Her hero stance is a bigger, stronger moment. You know, the more space on the page, the more important it feels.
And also the haha bun thing.
Haha buns, yeah.
Right. It gets a little
Works
bit more
better when
space.
It's got more space.
And so, again, like so much of it you can tell is reused, but it's trying to sort of change the way the story is told by how the panels are laid out.
John brings up a good point. We got rid of the tranq guns. They used to be carrying tranquilizer guns, and we switched them to tasers. And there's a reason we did that. And the reason is because tranquilizer guns are extremely dangerous or extremely useless. It's pretty much one or the other. Having exactly the right dosage of tranquilizer to knock somebody unconscious but not kill them varies so much based on body weight and a number of other factors that's why no police will ever use tranquilizers on human targets. They'll use them on big rampaging animals because ultimately they're trying to bring them in alive, but they don't care as much as they care about people. So we got rid of the tranquilizers. There was a cool beat here. So here in this, she gets shot in the arm with a tranquilizer. You see in the second panel, she still whoops all these dudes. And then
she pulls out the venom.
Pulls out the venom from the tranquilizer. Oh, that was cool.
But we didn't need it.
Didn't need it. And, you know, you might not be able to tell even what she's actually doing. So we just cut it.
So very quickly go back on the new version. Yeah, just that big shot of her doing that, kicking those guys, like that was important to have because it was easy for us to do things that were tiny and little hits versus giving good action establishing shots.
I like to say when it came to action, we used to do a lot of pop, 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 but not a lot of boom, if that makes sense. So we're trying to bring a little more boom into our action. To balance out the pops.
So let's move forward on.
Pop, pop.
I love you. No one's going to get that.
Do you think nobody is going to...
Well, some people will get that. Some people are fans of the community.
Pop, pop. Come on. We got Magnitude fans in the audience. Anybody?
I love you. All right. So anyways, you know...
So here we go. Yeah, she comes running around the corner. See, there's that shot. Running around the corner. Gets to the doors. So much less struggle for her. Like it just feels a lot easier, I think, in the old version.
It is a lot easier. And there's fewer pages and overall fewer panels just because everything's so condensed into just a couple pages.
Look at the difference here when she's just pushing the button to get the elevator doors to come. You know, one, she's leaning heavily and can barely keep herself up. The other, she's just pushing the button. I mean, it's a small touch. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but it makes a huge difference in how people...
Right, and look at how emotive that face is in the top right corner on the new page versus the old one.
We're a lot better at expressions now. Also notice, in the new version, when she's pushing the buttons, like both buttons are lit up. Like she will go any direction, whichever door opens first.
Yep. All right, let's move forward.
Yeah. Here we have another...
Look at how much more space we're giving things.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
Another zoom to make it an angle shift so that it's more dynamic. A little bit more space for the sweeping kick.
A lot more space for the sweeping kick. Look how tiny it is there.
More space for the guy falling down. And everybody opening fire. And the Huff-Huffs have more space. That's a good thing, too, because it gives a longer period of silence and solitude so that she spends more time on her own in that elevator and can actually catch her breath more and remember, you know, have that flashback moment. And here, like, there's no moment of ding, let's go. Here, there is a second for her to, like, collect herself before she comes
And now, here's where we change the area.
Yes. The big difference, the Sky Carrier.
This is important because when we made this story, and really we were writing it mostly in between 2006 and 2007.
We were concepting it as early as 2004. We were starting to make plans.
Yeah, real
for what
make
we would
plans.
eventually do. We didn't start getting into the actual writing and
And
prep
at
until-
that point in time, an homage to something like the, Helicarrier, which hadn't been in
Helicarriers hadn't
comics
been
for
used.
years.
You got to understand, the Avengers was not a popular comic. Well, that's not fair. Disassembled had kind of wrecked up the joint, but there were some good Avengers books going on. Point is, they hadn't used helicarriers in a long time, not in any significant sense. Everybody kind of remembered them, but they weren't a thing. And so throwing an homage to one here was a cute throwback reminder to remember when comics were fun. And then this little movie called The Avengers came out. Don't know if you saw it. Kind of made helicarriers a thing the entire friggin' planet was aware of. And so one of our goals with the extended director's cut was to make our world less derivative.
Right. And so we could allow ourselves to continue having characters and stuff that were shorthand,
Yeah.
but
the
places as often as we could, when it worked, we would change the areas,
Yeah.
we would change the environments. And this was one of them. And I think, as much as this was cool here,
Yeah.
for the scene that we needed to create with Countrymen, the desert was a much better environment overall.
Sure. There's a desolation to a desert. Now, there's something to the original that is positive. First off, briefly, panel 2, that's the cast of scrubs that she's running past.
Gives you a sense of when we were creating this.
Yeah. Now, there is something to be said for the leap of faith. She
Right.
gets to the edge and she jumps off into the nothingness.
Right. And that is
rather
cool.
than stay and wait to find out what's happening. There is some value there. But in the original version, she wouldn't get to find out what was happening until much later, and she had to have this whole conversation with Virtue just explaining what was going on. And we thought it was better if we cut to the chase and have Countryman right there, do the explanation, get to the point a little bit faster so that we can resolve this
So we know what's going
before
on.
she leaves.
We understand the status quo.
Because
Move
we
forward.
never wanted Hope to be a fugitive. That's not the story.
Right.
The story is she's fine. She's just starting over in a world she doesn't quite understand.
I think one of the things that a lot of writers will do is they'll forget or not pay attention to the meaning of what they're writing,
Yeah.
and the repercussions of what they're writing. And that's something that we fell into, where we were not paying nearly enough attention to what happens now. How does the law factor into this?
Yeah.
Why would people be like, oh, that's all right, and just leave it be?
Well, the bigger thing is, if we don't want her to be a fugitive, why are we writing a story where she runs away from government agents and is just on the lam?
Right. And then
between
it's
pages?
never, ever
It's
mentioned
never dealt
again.
with in any serious way.
Yeah.
So we got rid of that and simplified it and made it about the connections.
Right. I think here's a good thing to just sort of pay attention to is you have to set a tone for your story.
Mm-hmm.
The tone that we're trying to set is, I would put it under the category of fairly naturalistic.
Yeah.
And because it's a naturalistic story, there are certain rules and ideas and stuff that we're going to have to at least somewhat adhere to, because that's the kind of story and the kind of contract that we're writing with the audience. This is why a thing like Batman versus Superman doesn't work so well, because on the one hand, they want to have sort of like silly, fun hand-waving things like, oh, don't pay attention to that, it's a superhero movie. Well, also saying simultaneously, well, this is very dark and it's very serious and it's
Yeah.
very realistic and it takes
Yeah.
place in the important
can't-
real world.
You can't have it both ways. You can't say this is the real world with real world rules, and then when the real world rules disagree with what you're doing, say, well, it's comics. What are you
Right.
going to do?
You know, when Batman just destroyed all those people and broke their necks and stuff, they're fine.
Yeah.
When that car was
Batman-
completely flattened, he's fine.
Batman wants Superman brought in because he's careless and is going to lead to tremendous loss of life. Meanwhile, Batman's running around killing all kinds of people, so whatever. Let's
So
not
anyways.
belabor the point. We could bitch about Batman Superman forever. So she falls, we cut to Motherboard, who finds out that she had fallen and escaped.
And now we are completely into what will be stuff that will
Partly.
sort of rework for the most part.
She
And
contacts Conscience, and Conscience is upset. And this was a storyline that we'd originally had where Connie was angry about Hope being in a coma. It's that thing where it's kind of the inverse of survivor's guilt, where you get irrationally upset at the person who survived the event.
That they weren't there for you in your time of need
you
and
weren't
all
here
that
for me.
kind of
I've
stuff.
been alone for the last 2 years because you were in a fucking coma. And again, we were setting something up that we were not going to pay off because basically immediately, we'll talk about the bad intro of Quake and Singe when we do issue 2 commentary. But here, as soon as Hope shows up, Conscience lets all that anger go and we're fine.
Yep.
We're fine. So it was setting something up that wasn't ever going to pay off. It was adding nuance of story that wasn't really meaningful. We thought it was a lot more effective to just have the family glad to be back together because...
Why not?
Why not, for God's sake? Let the girl have a moment of peace and happiness before we start screwing with her again.
Right. So, is your plan to only do so much of this?
I think we can go, well...
No.
Okay. Yeah.
No.
So here's the haircut scene. And
that really plays out. If your plan is to split this up between this
I guess we
new
should
version of
probably
issue
save
2,
this
you're
for
going to
next.
save it. Yeah.
Most of this stuff isn't even really used anymore. Most of this sequence doesn't really exist anymore.
I guess I'm going to ask you how you want people to see this when it goes on the website. And I know, I'm sorry that everybody's having to hear us work this out, but if they're going to watch this in one go, I think
I'm not
it's
sure
too
anybody would
much.
watch this in one go. That's a lot.
It's a lot. So that's why I'm saying if you want to finish out this issue here, that's great. But
Well, we're not doing the whole issue.
okay.
This is the last scene I do.
All right.
Just because this scene isn't in any of the issues anywhere.
Okay. All right.
So initially we had this sequence between Hope and Conscience.
Which was dumping a lot of plot and what
Dumping a
would
lot of
happen
plot.
and stuff
All
like
this
that.
stuff is basically now being covered in the Countryman scene in
Yep.
the new version. That allows us to do different things with Conscience rather than having her be the bearer of exposition. Introducing the Teen Force 3, which we'll be doing elsewhere. They're extremely important and will come up many times, but they're the Pop-Tart superheroes. And a cameo by John Tesh.
Another
to make sure
real
you know
world
how
person.
90s it is.
That's right. Thank you, Entertainment Tonight. And we got to see, like, this is something that we merged with a new scene for
Yeah.
Virtue. So
Second.
this, in a lot of ways, is kind of
I
done.
suppose, in a sense.
Yep.
She decides to wear her mom's costume because she can't fit her childhood costume anymore.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not bad material, this scene. We just, in the grand scheme of things, there were choices that had to be made. And one of the big choices was the original first issue is a whole series of Hope has a conversation with this person, after that person, after that person, after another person. It was just
And
a
it
whole
feels
lot
like
of
the
long
same
talks.
thing over and over and over
Yeah.
again, and it gets exhausting. And I think it was 36 or 37 pages of ultra dense.
Dense
Right.
conversation.
You know, this page alone, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 panels on this one page. And this is one of the pages
That's light.
that's light.
Compared to others.
Holy smokes.
So we decided to break that up. That was part of our calculus in deciding to make the first issue into 2 issues. Break that up, move some of this information around, try to do more with less.
Yep. So I think we'll come back to this here.
Yeah. So when we do the second issue commentary, since a lot of this material, I guess, does make it into a scene in the second issue, we'll cover this in a little more detail.
Yep.
So that, I think we'll call it a night there.
Yeah, I
We've
think
been
we
talking
will.
a long time.
So before we leave, if there's any other questions
Yes,
at
we'll
all,
throw it
that-
open to the commenters, the viewership. If there's things that you'd like to see or hear that we haven't really talked about yet, thank you for being here all night, for being interested enough to listen. We love these characters. We love this story.
It's a very important story for us to tell, and again, it feels general to start, but that is very intentional.
Yeah.
That it feels somewhat comfortable.
I'd say the first 10 issues of Uniques are really about establishing a baseline for these
Right.
characters.
What is the world?
What is the world? What is our character's place in that world?
Right.
And that's why we called it the Uniques instead of naming it after the team. because it's not just about these characters. It's about this place and all of these people and what's going on with all of them over time. So, yeah, that's
Right,
the
I think
first
that's it.
issue. Thanks for joining us.
Yep.
Being a part of this. We're going to do more issues. I think this was fairly successful.
Yep. This is
Um,
the first of
First of
however many.
it takes for us to get to the end of the series.
That's right.
Yeah. So, Unique's number 1. I like the new version so much better.
So much better.
I am really pleased with how this came out. And it has been a start of an extremely rewarding process.
And a process I think that we're both glad that we did, because not
Yeah.
only did it make better issues, but it got us back into the world and into the
And it brought
characters
back
as
stuff
writers.
that we had always wanted to have. We'd always wanted to do more with Motherboard's family. We'd always wanted to do more with some of these side characters, with Countrymen, get them more involved in the story. Some of these scenes we had in mind originally. We just didn't think we had room or time or whatever. So it's nice to have the series being what we had always wanted it to be.
Yep. So thank you so much for coming. You
Thanks
guys
very
were
much.
great. We'll
Um,
do this another time.
We will do more. Keep up with us. You can follow us on Twitch.
Yep.
You can check us out online, comfortandadam.com. We'll link you out to all our social media, or just look for Comfort and Adam wherever you are. There's a
That's
good
right.
chance that we're there.
And we do Twitch, not always
Clearly.
commentary things.
Yes, we also
Um,
stream art. Mostly we stream art.
And that is Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday night, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And we usually go for 2
Yeah.
hours.
So if you come back next Tuesday, you'll get to watch us finishing the
Yes.
color on the Disney Villains piece we've been working on.
Right.
Excited for that. So,
Awesome.
yeah, thanks everybody
Right.
for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Ready to sign off?
Over it goes. Where's the button? Where's the button?